The year was 2247, and humanity had finally reached the stars. They had built colonies on 7 distant worlds, and their ships traveled faster than anyone had dreamed possible just a century before Earth was proud and hopeful and full of dreams about the future. Then, the sensors detected something that changed everything. A massive armada of alien warships appeared at the edge of the solar system, and there were more ships than anyone could count. The vessels were enormous and strange, and they moved in perfect formation, like a single living creature. Captain Amara Oze stood on the bridge of the observation station near Jupiter, and she watched the alien fleet approach with a mix of wonder and fear. "How many ships are there?" she asked her sensor. "Officer, we have counted over 12,000 so far, and more keep appearing every hour." Amara felt her heart pound in her chest, because humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they had their answer, and it was terrifying. The aliens sent a message that was translated by advanced computers, and the message was simple and direct. "We are the Galactic Council, and we have governed these stars for 10,000 cycles, and we wish to meet with your leaders." Earth responded quickly. An ambassador, Idris Okonkwo, was chosen to represent all of humanity. Idris was a tall man with kind eyes and a calm voice, and he had spent his whole life bringing people together. He had ended wars and built peace between nations that had hated each other for centuries. Now he faced his greatest challenge. A small shuttle carried him to the Council flagship, which was called the Eternal Accord. The ship was so large that it made Earth's greatest stations look like toys. When Idris stepped aboard, he found himself in a corridor made of glowing crystal, and strange metal alien guards escorted him through halls that stretched for kilometers, past windows that looked out into space, and he saw hundreds of different ship designs surrounding a flagship. Each design represented a different species, and each species had submitted to the Council long ago. Finally, Idris entered the grand chamber, and he stopped breathing for a moment. Room was the size of a city, and it was filled with thousands of alien beings. Some were tall and thin, like living trees, and others were short and covered in scales, floated in the air, and others crawled on many legs. Some had faces that Idris could almost read, and others were so strange that he could not tell which end was the front. At the center of the chamber stood a raised platform, and on that platform stood 12 beings who radiated power and authority. These were the elder races, and they had ruled the galaxy since before humans had learned to make fire. The tallest of them stepped forward, and Idris saw that this being was made entirely of living crystal light, moved inside the creature like thoughts made visible. "I am High Arbiter Vel Faxis, and I speak for the Council, and you are the ambassador of the species called humanity." "Yes." Idris nodded and found his voice again. "I am Ambassador Idris Okonkwo, and I am honored to meet you, and I bring greetings from Earth and all human worlds." Valfaxis made a sound that might have been laughter, but it sounded like glass breaking. "Your greetings are noted, but they are not necessary, and we have not come to exchange pleasantries." The crystalline being gestured, and suddenly a holographic display appeared in the air. It showed a map of the galaxy with the Council's territory marked in blue and humanity's tiny cluster of worlds marked in red for 10,000 cycles. The Council has maintained order in this galaxy, and every species that achieves interstellar travel must accept their place in our civilization. And this is the natural way of things. Idris listened carefully, and he noticed that something felt wrong about this conversation. "What do you mean by accepting our place?" he asked. Valfaxis seemed pleased by the question. "New species must submit to Council authority and pay tribute for the protection we provide, and contribute workers for the great projects, and accept their position at the base of our hierarchy." Idris felt cold despite the warmth of the chamber. "And if we do not wish to submit?" The entire chamber went silent, and thousands of alien eyes turned to look at the small human who had dared to ask such a question. Velfexus leaned closer, and the light inside the crystal being turned a darker shade. Every species in this chamber asked that same question once, and every species learned the answer, and the answer is that refusal is not possible. Another elder race member stepped forward, and this one looked like a mass of writhing shadows. We command a fleet of 900,000 warships, and our technology is beyond your comprehension, and we have ended species that were far more powerful than yours. Velfaxus raised a crystalline hand, and the shadow being stepped back. Let us be clear about what we require, and then you may return to your leaders with our terms. The holographic display changed and showed a document written in every human language. You will surrender all colonial worlds immediately, and you will pay 40% of your homeworld's economic output each year as tribute, and you will provide laborers when we demand them, and you will accept permanent status as a junior species with no voice in council affairs. Idris read the document, and his hands trembled with anger that he forced himself to hide. How long do we have to consider this offer? Velfaxus made that terrible laughing sound again. You misunderstand the nature of this meeting, because this is not a negotiation, and this is not an offer, and you have 1 of your weeks to sign the covenant of submission, and if we do not sign, the light inside Velfaxus turned blood red. Then we will reduce your species to a manageable population, and we will take what we want anyway, and the survivors will serve us in chains rather than as junior partners. Idris stood very still, and he thought about Earth and about his children, and about every human who had ever lived and dreamed of the stars. I will bring your message to my people. See that you do, little ambassador, and see that they understand their position. When Idris returned to Earth, he carried the weight of humanity's future on his shoulders. That night, every nation on the planet watched the same broadcast, and every human being learned that they were not alone in the universe. They also learned that the universe wanted them to kneel in for the first time in centuries. Humanity faced a choice that would define them forever. The emergency session of the United Earth Assembly began at midnight in Geneva. Every seat in the Great Hall was filled, and every screen in the world carried the broadcast. Live presidents and prime ministers sat beside kings and council leaders, and they all wore the same expression of shock and fear. Ambassador Okonkwo stood at the podium, and he told them everything. He told them about the massive ships and the strange aliens and the 12 elder races who ruled the galaxy. He told them about the demands and the deadline and the threat of extinction. When he finished speaking, the hall erupted into chaos. We must surrender immediately, shouted the representative from the European Federation. We cannot fight a fleet of 900,000 ships, and our entire navy has less than 300 vessels. Surrender means slavery, answered the representative from the African Union. Did you not hear the terms they demand from us? Slavery is better than death. Someone else shouted. At least our children would survive. The arguments continued for hours, and tempers grew hotter with each passing minute. Some said that humanity should fight even if it meant destruction, because at least they would die free. Others said that survival was the only thing that mattered, and that dignity meant nothing to the dead. Ambassador Okonkwo watched and listened, and he felt the weight of every word pressing down on his shoulders. Meanwhile, in a secure research facility beneath the Swiss Alps, a woman named Dr. Yuki Tanaka was studying the data that the Council had shared. Aliens had given humanity access to their historical archives as a gesture of what they called inevitable welcome. The files contained thousands of years of records about species that had joined the Council. Yuki read through file after file, and a strange pattern began to emerge. This does not make sense, she muttered to herself as she compared the records. Every species that joined the Council seemed to follow the same path, would resist at first, and then they would accept the terms, and then they would slowly fade. Species that had shown great creativity and ambition before joining would become quiet and passive after a few centuries. Their art would become repetitive, and their science would stagnate, and their fire would simply go out. Yuki searched for exceptions and found none, not one. Species in 10,000 years had ever refused the Council's terms. Not one species had ever risen to challenge the elder races after joining. They are not just collecting tribute. Yuki realized with growing horror. They are breaking spirits, and they are making sure that no one ever threatens them. She immediately requested an emergency meeting with the Assembly. At the same time, Admiral Chung Wei-Lin was meeting with the military leaders of every major nation. Chun was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, and she had commanded humanity's space forces for 20 years. "I will not lie to you," she told the gathered generals and admirals. "We cannot win a conventional war against the Council fleet." The room fell silent, and despair settled over the officers like a heavy blanket. However, Chun continued, "We are not as defenseless as the Council believes." She pressed a button, and classified files appeared on every screen. Project Prometheus has been in development for 30 years, and it was designed for exactly this kind of situation. The files showed weapons that most of the officers had never imagined. There were relativistic kill vehicles hidden throughout the solar system that could accelerate to nearly the speed of light. There were weapons platforms disguised as asteroids and mining stations, and there was something called a quantum vacuum disruptor that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. These weapons cannot win a war, Chun admitted, but they can make victory very expensive for our enemies. She showed them projections and calculations. If the Council attacks Earth, we can destroy at least 40 of their major worlds, including the homeworlds of several elder races. "That is mutually assured destruction," said one of the generals. "Both sides lose everything." "Yes," Chun agreed, "but it means that exterminating humanity would cost them more than leaving us alone." The military leaders debated the implications, while Dr. Tanaka presented her findings to the Assembly. The Council is not just an empire, Yuki explained. It is a system designed to prevent any species from ever becoming powerful enough to challenge the elder races. She showed them the data about stagnating cultures and dying dreams. "If we surrender, we will survive, but we will lose everything that makes us human, and within a few generations, we will be just like all the others." The Assembly members looked at each other, and a new fear joined the old one. It was no longer just about living or dying. It was about what kind of life they would be living for. Ambassador Okonkwo stood again, and the room fell quiet. "When I stood before the Council, I saw something that I did not understand at first," he said. "The High Arbiter was confident, and the elder races were powerful, but underneath their words, I sensed something else." He paused and looked around at the faces of humanity's leaders. "They were afraid, and I do not think they were afraid of our weapons, because they know how weak we are compared to them." "Then what were they afraid of?" asked the European representative. Kong shook his head slowly. "I do not know yet, but I believe they needed us to say yes, and they needed it very badly." The debate continued for 3 more days, and humanity remained divided. Some wanted to surrender and survive, some wanted to fight and die free, and some wondered if there might be a third option that no one had considered yet. On the final day, the Assembly took a vote. It was closer than anyone expected, but in the end, the decision was made. Ambassador Okonkwo would return to the Council flagship, and he would deliver humanity's answer. He prepared to leave. His daughter came to see him. "Father, are you afraid?" she asked. Okonkwo looked at her and smiled. "I am terrified, but sometimes courage is not the absence of fear, and sometimes courage is doing what is right even when you are more afraid than you have ever been." He hugged her one last time, and then he walked to his shuttle. The stars waited for humanity's answer, and the answer would change everything. The shuttle-carrying Ambassador Okonghuo approached the Council flagship for the second time. This time he was not curious or amazed. This time he was calm and focused and ready. Deadline had arrived, and the galaxy waited for humanity's answer. When he entered the Grand Chamber, every seat was filled with alien representatives from 4,000 different species. They had all come to watch the newest species submit to Council authority, just as they had done so long ago. High Arbiter Velfaxis stood at the center of the chamber, and the crystalline being glowed with satisfaction. The human ambassador returns, and we trust he brings good news. Okonghuo walked slowly to the speaking platform, and he felt thousands of eyes watching his every step. Some of those eyes belonged to species that had once been proud and free. Some belonged to species that had forgotten what freedom even meant. He reached the platform and stood straight, and Tal Velfaxis gestured, and a ceremonial document appeared. In the air between them, the covenant of submission has been prepared, and it requires only your signature, and then humanity will take its place among the client species of the Council. The chamber was silent with anticipation. Okong looked at the document, and then he looked at Velfaxis. Before I give our answer, I would like to thank the Council for their generous offer. He said. Velfaxis nodded, and the light inside the crystal being brightened with pleasure. Humanity recognizes the overwhelming power of the Council fleet, and we understand that you could destroy our worlds if you chose to do so. Several of the elder races exchanged glances, and they seemed pleased that the human understood his position. We are a young species, and we have only traveled among the stars for a short time, and we know that we cannot match your technology or your numbers. Velfaxis raised a crystalline hand. Your wisdom does you credit, and now please sign the covenant so that we may welcome you properly. Okonghuo did not move toward the document. Instead, he took a deep breath and spoke the word that would echo across the galaxy. No. Silence that followed was unlike anything the chamber had ever experienced. 4,000 species sat frozen in shock and disbelief. Light inside Velfaxis flickered and dimmed, and then flared bright with confusion. The translator must have malfunctioned. The High Arbiter said, "Please repeat your answer." "The translator is working perfectly," Okonghuo replied. "Humanity declines your terms, and we will not sign the covenant of submission." A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber, and aliens whispered to each other in 100 different languages. This had never happened before. In 10,000 cycles, no species had ever refused. Velfaxis took a step toward the small human, and the crystal being towered over him like a mountain. "You do not understand what you are saying, and perhaps your species is too primitive to recognize inevitable defeat. We understand perfectly." Okonghuo said, "You have the power to destroy us, and you have made that very clear. Then why do you refuse?" Okonghuo smiled, and it was not a smile of happiness, but a smile of determination. "Because some things matter more than survival." The chamber erupted in noise and confusion, and Velfaxis raised both hands to demand silence. "Explain yourself." Human Okonghuo turned to address not just the elder races, but all the species in the chamber. "My people have faced extinction many times, and we have survived ice ages that covered our world in frozen death, and we have survived plagues that killed half our population, and we have survived wars where we nearly destroyed ourselves with our own weapons." He paused and let his words sink in. "Each time we survived because we refused to give up, and each time we chose to fight for our future rather than accept a lesser existence. Those were natural challenges." Velfaxis interrupted. "This is different, and we are offering you survival. You are offering us death." Okonghuo replied, "Not death of the body, but death of the spirit, and death of everything that makes us human." He pointed at the gathered species around the chamber. "I have studied the records you shared with us, and I have seen what happens to species that accept your terms. And they survive, but they stop growing, and they stop dreaming. and they stopped being who they truly were. Some of the alien representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. That is the natural order. Velfaxis insisted, but the certainty in the being's voice wavered slightly. It is not natural, and it is a cage that you have built to keep others small and weak. The shadow being from the elder races moved forward, with anger radiating from its dark form. You dare to insult the council, and we will crush your worlds and leave nothing but ash. Okonkwo did not flinch. You can try, but you will not find it as easy as you expect. He raised his hand, and a holographic display appeared showing the locations of hidden weapons throughout the solar system. Project Prometheus has been preparing for threats like you for 30 years, and hidden throughout our territory are weapons that can strike at the speed of light. The display showed targeting data for 40 major worlds, including the homeworlds of several elder races. If you attack Earth, these weapons will launch automatically, and your worlds will burn alongside ours. Velfaxis stared at the display with something that looked like shock. You would destroy yourselves just to hurt us? We would rather die free than live as slaves, and we would rather burn than fade away. Okonkwo lowered his hand, and the display vanished. But there is more, and you cannot kill all of us because we have already sent colony ships toward distant galaxies, and sleeper vessels carrying millions of humans are traveling beyond your reach as we speak. He stepped closer to Velfaxis and looked up at the towering crystal being. You can destroy Earth, and you can kill billions of my people, but humanity will survive somewhere among the stars, and we will remember, and we will return. The chamber was utterly silent. And there is something else you should consider. Okonkwo continued. Every species in this room has just heard a primitive young race refuse the mighty council. He turned to look at the thousands of watching aliens. They have just learned that submission was always a choice, and they have just learned that the council can be defied. Velfaxis looked around the chamber and saw thousands of faces watching with new expressions. Some looked confused, and some looked afraid, but some looked like they were remembering something they had forgotten long ago. This audience is concluded. Velfaxis announced suddenly. The council will deliberate and announce our decision. Okonkwo nodded and walked out of the chamber with his head held high. He did not know if humanity would survive the next day, but he knew that whatever happened, the galaxy would never be the same. The days after humanity's refusal were filled with fear and waiting Earths. Defense systems stood ready, and every human looked up at the sky expecting fire to rain down at any moment. But the attack never came. The council fleet remained at the edge of the solar system, and it did not advance, and it did not retreat. Something had changed, and no one understood what it was across the galaxy. The news spread faster than any ship could travel. A species called humanity had said no to the Galactic Council. Young and primitive species had refused to kneel at first. Many aliens did not believe the reports, because such a thing had never happened in recorded history. Covenant of submission had stood unchanged for 10,000 cycles, and every species had accepted it eventually, but the recordings from the Grand Chamber could not be denied. Everyone saw the human ambassador stand before the elder races and speak his single word of defiance. Everyone saw that the council did not immediately destroy his species. This was the crack that would break the ancient order on a world called Rethan Prime. The leaders of the Rithani collective gathered in secret. Rithani were tall beings with blue skin and 4 arms, and they had served the council faithfully for 3,000 cycles. Why did the council not attack? Asked Elder Vashin, who was the oldest of their leaders. They have always destroyed those who resist. Perhaps they are planning a larger response, suggested another elder. Or perhaps, said a young Rithani named Kira, who should not have been speaking at all, the humans showed us something we had forgotten. The older leaders turned to stare at her with disapproval. You speak out of turn, young one. Forgive me, elders, but I cannot stay silent, and we have all seen the recordings, and the human was right about what happens to species that submit. She pulled up data files that mirrored what Dr. Tanaka had discovered on Earth. Our ancestors were inventors and artists and explorers, and now we are servants and tribute payers and nothing more. That is the natural order. Elder Vashin replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it natural, or is it simply what we were told to believe? The question hung in the air, and no one had an answer similar. Conversations were happening on 1,000 worlds. The Moravian Unity announced that they would delay their annual tribute payment, pending a comprehensive review of their agreement with the Council of the Vesser. Dominion requested a formal audience to discuss modifications to their covenant species that had been silent for centuries. Suddenly had questions they wanted answered. The elder races watched these developments with growing alarm. High Arbiter Velfaxis paced through the corridors of the Council flagship and tried to understand how everything had gone so wrong. One human with one word had done what no fleet could accomplish. He had made the other species remember that they had a choice. Velfaxis knew that the Council could still destroy Earth, but the cost would be enormous. The humans had proven that their weapons were real, and 40 elder race worlds would burn in retaliation. Even worse, the other species might see such destruction as proof that the Council ruled through fear alone. Some might even be inspired to build their own weapons and make their own threats. The ancient system was breaking, and Velfaxis did not know how to fix it. After much deliberation, the High Arbiter made a decision that shocked the other elder races. He sent a private message to Ambassador Okonkwo requesting a secret meeting. Gasonko came alone to a small ship in neutral space, and Velfaxis was waiting for him. I did not expect to see you again, Okonkwo said as he took his seat. I thought you would prefer to communicate through weapons. I considered that option, Velfaxis admitted, but I have realized that destroying your species would only make our problems worse. Your problems? The crystalline being made a sound that might have been a sigh. You have set events in motion that cannot be stopped, and species that were content for millennia are now asking questions and demanding changes. Okonkwo nodded slowly. That was the point, was it? Velfaxis looked at the human with something like curiosity. Did you really understand what you were doing, or were you simply too stubborn to submit? Perhaps a little of both. The two leaders sat in silence for a moment, and then Velfaxis did something unexpected. I will tell you the truth about why the Council exists and why we demanded your submission. Okonkwo leaned forward with interest. Long before the Council was formed, there was another species called the HFY, and they were brilliant and creative and ambitious, just like your kind. The light inside Velfaxis dimmed with old pain. They rose faster than any species in history, and they developed technologies that we still do not fully understand, and they conquered world after world with a hunger that could never be satisfied. What happened to them? They nearly consumed the entire galaxy, and billions died before they were finally stopped. And even then the HFY were not defeated by others. Velfaxis paused, and the silence stretched long. They burned themselves out, and their hunger turned inward, and they destroyed themselves with their own ambition. And when the fires finally died, there was almost nothing left of galactic civilization. Okonkwo understood now. So you built the Council to prevent another species from becoming what the HFY were. Yes, and we have maintained peace for 10,000 cycles by ensuring that no species grows too powerful or too ambitious. You kept everyone small because you were afraid of what they might become. We kept everyone alive. Velfaxis said with sudden intensity. We saw the fire in your species from the moment you reached the stars, and we saw the same hunger that the HFY had. We thought if we contained you early, you thought you could save the galaxy from us. Okonkwo finished. Yes, Okonkwo thought about this for a long time. I understand your fear, and I even understand why you built the system, but you made a mistake. What mistake? You have been so afraid of fire that you forgot what it is truly for. And fire does not only destroy. He stood and walked to the window where stars burned in the darkness. Fire also warms the cold and lights the darkness and forges weak metal into strong steel. And yes, fire can consume, but it can also create Velfaxis. Watch the human with ancient eyes. You believe your species is different from the Ashuri? I believe every species has the potential for both destruction and creation, and the difference is not in what they are, but in what they choose to be. Okonkwo turned back to face the High Arbiter. Give us a chance, and let us prove that there is another way. Velfaxis was silent for a very long time finally. The crystalline being spoke words that would reshape the galaxy. Perhaps it is time for a new experiment. 50 years had passed since humanity said no to the Galactic Council. The galaxy was a different place now, and Ambassador Idris Okonkwo stood at the window of his home on Earth, looking up at the stars he had helped to change. His hair was white, and his face was lined with age, but his eyes still held the same fire that had burned in that council chamber so long ago. Today was a special day, and representatives from hundreds of worlds were gathering for the first joint assembly of the Stellar Compact. This was the new alliance that humanity had helped to build, and it was nothing like the old council. There was no tribute and no submission and no hierarchy. It placed some species above others. There was only cooperation and mutual respect, and the shared dream of a better future. Okonkwo dressed carefully in his formal robes, and a shuttle came to bring him to the assembly halls. He traveled. He remembered how the changes had begun after his secret meeting with Velfaxis. The council had made an unprecedented announcement. Humanity would be given provisional status as an independent species, and they would neither submit nor be destroyed. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but it gave the galaxy time to adjust. And in that time, humanity had done something remarkable. Instead of building weapons or conquering territory, they had opened their doors to anyone who wanted to visit. The human free trade corridor became the most dynamic region in known space, and species came from across the galaxy to see these strange beings who had defied the elder races. They found humans who were eager to share technology and knowledge without demanding anything in return. They found markets where any species could trade as equals, regardless of their status. In the old council, they found schools where young beings from different worlds learned together and formed friendships that crossed every boundary. Most importantly, they found hope. The Rathani were among the first to leave. The council officially, Kira, who had spoken out of turn at that secret meeting, had become a leader of her people, and she guided them toward independence. The humans showed us that we had forgotten how to dream. She said, now we are learning to dream again. The Moravian unity followed, and then the Vesser Dominion, and then dozens more. Not every species left the council, and some preferred the security of the old ways, even if it meant giving up their ambitions. Many chose freedom, and they chose to join humanity's experiment. The old council fractured into pieces. Some of the elder races joined the Stellar Compact and accepted a new role as partners rather than rulers. Others retreated to their ancient territories and watched from a distance with suspicion and perhaps a little envy. Velfaxis surprised everyone by becoming one of the strongest supporters of the new order. I spent 10,000 cycles trying to prevent another disaster. The crystalline being had said, perhaps it is time to build something good instead of just stopping something bad. The shuttle arrived at the assembly hall, which was a massive structure that floated in orbit above Earth. It had been built together by 100 different species, and its design reflected all of their traditions. Kamine Okonkwo walked slowly through the corridors, and everywhere he went aliens stopped to bow or wave or simply smile. He was a living legend now, and everyone knew the story of the human who had changed the stars with one word. The Assembly Hall was filled with thousands of representatives, and they rose to their feet when Okonkwo entered, walked to the central podium, and waited for the applause to fade. 50 years ago, he began, I stood in a different chamber surrounded by beings who wanted humanity to kneel. His voice was older now, but it still carried clearly through the hall. They told us that submission was the natural order, and that resistance was impossible, and that we had no choice but to accept our place at the bottom of their hierarchy. He paused and looked around at all the faces watching him. I gave them one word in response, and that word was no. A ripple of emotion passed through the crowd because everyone knew this story, but I want to be clear about something that is often forgotten, and that word was not special because it came from a human. Okonkwo shook his head. That word was powerful because it came from someone who believed that principles matter more than survival, and it could have come from any species in this room. He pointed at the Rithani delegation. It could have come from you and you, who remembered your ancestors' dreams after 3,000 years of sleep. He pointed at the Moravians. It could have come from you, and you who chose uncertainty over comfortable chains. He spread his arms wide to embrace the entire assembly. The fire that burns in humanity burns in all of you as well, and we did not teach you to be brave, because that courage was always inside you. Kira of the Rithani stood, and her blue skin seemed to glow with emotion. You gave us something that we had forgotten existed. She said, you gave us hope, and you gave us permission to hope. No, Okonkwo replied gently. We gave you a reminder, and the hope was always yours, and the choice was always yours. He smiled, and the weight of years seemed to lift from his shoulders. That is what the old council never understood, and they thought that keeping species small and afraid would keep them safe, but fear does not make peace. He looked toward where Velfaxes sat among the elder race representatives who had joined the compact. True, peace comes when every being has the freedom to grow and dream and become whatever they choose to be, and true safety comes when we protect each other, not because we must, but because we want to. Okonkwo straightened, and his voice grew stronger. Today, we begin a new chapter in the history of this galaxy, and the Stellar Compact is not a replacement for the old council, and we are not here to rule anyone. He raised his hand toward the stars visible through the transparent ceiling. We are here to build something better together, and we are here to prove that fire can warm and light and forge as well as burn. The assembly erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very walls across the galaxy. On 1,000 different worlds, beings of every shape and size looked up at the stars with new eyes. Children heard the story of the human who said no, and they dreamed of the futures they would build. Old beings who had given up hope long ago felt something stirring in their hearts once more. And on Earth, Okonkwo's grandchildren played in a garden, while ships from 100 worlds passed overhead carrying traders and travelers and dreamers. The stars that had once seemed cold and hostile now burned with possibility. Humanity had faced an empire that demanded submission, and they had answered with a single word. That word had not just saved their species, had set the galaxy free, and this was only the beginning.